After pretty much every challenge in Persona 5 has been attempted by somebody at this point, it is really hard to come up with something new or unique. And while today's challenge has been attempted before, as far as I am aware, it has not been completed yet, and considering you clicked on the video, you already know what I'm talking about. Today we're going to find out if you can beat Persona 5 Royal with a Nuzlocke Ruleset. Now, for those who don't know what a Nuzlocke is, let me quickly explain. Nuzlockes originally come from the Pokémon community and are a type of challenge run with all kinds of restrictions, like only being able to catch one Pokémon per area, permadeath, and a full game reset when you get wiped. We are going to take this concept, slap it onto Persona 5 Royal, and see what is going to come out of it. Now, before we start, as always, let's quickly take a look at the rules for this run. First of all, only one Persona can be acquired per palace or mementos section. In a classic Nuzlocke, you're only allowed to catch the first encounter you run into. In this one, we will limit it to one Persona per section, with no restriction on when to get it. Note that this does not include the tutorial Persona Pixie that you automatically get at Kamoshida's castle. Persona fusion and the use of the compendium is forbidden. The only Personas we are allowed to carry are the ones we get in dungeons. Gallows and itemization in theory is allowed, but considering we only get a very limited amount of Personas, I am not sure if they will be useful at all. Next up, the party's level cannot exceed the level of the palace boss. For example, in Kamoshida's castle, the boss Kamoshida is level 11, therefore the maximum level allowed for the party is level 11. When you get to the next palace, the maximum level will be raised to 18, since Madarame is level 18, and so on. Permadeath applies. If someone in the party gets wiped, we are not allowed to use that party member anymore. They have to be switched out for another one permanently. If there is nobody to switch them out for, they are allowed to stay in the party at 1 HP and have to guard their turns. Game over means full reset. If Joker gets wiped and we game over, we're not allowed to reload a previous save file, but we have to start from scratch all over again. The difficulty we're playing on is hard, since it's harder than Merciless. Also, New Game Plus is not allowed as always, and the goal of the run is to achieve the true royal ending. And that is pretty much it, so let's get going everybody, I guess. We start the game, select the difficulty, and name our main character. Due to a lack of creativity, I just went with Nuzlocke, and that's pretty much all for the beginning. We go through the opening cutscenes, Joker wakes to his persona, and on the second visit to the castle, Ryuji does so as well. And here is already the first somewhat dangerous boss fight. The combination of Eligor and 2 Bicorn can deal big damage on hard difficulty, and to get this run off on a good note, on turn 1, both Eligor and the remaining Bicorn wipe Ryuji, and yeah, we're not going to continue this one. Losing Ryuji this early pretty much means reset. I took this a little lightly and paid the price for it, so we start the game over again and fast forward to the boss battle. This time making sure we wipe both Bicorns on turn 1. Eligor itself can't really do much at this point anymore, and we win the battle and continue on with the story for a bit more. We unlock Ryuji's Confidant, and after perfectly nailing the quick time event on Shio, Best Girl Ann follows the party into the palace before getting our tutorial on how to acquire new personas. Like mentioned in the rules before, since this is the tutorial, it does not count as a captured persona, so we are still allowed to get something when we come back into the palace later. Anyways, Ann gets kidnapped and shortly afterwards awakens to her persona as well. The boss fight against Belphegor is pretty safe. We open up with a double Aki by Ann, deplete all our ammo on the boss, and are already able to get the win on the following turn. Nothing special here. Back in the real world, we meet Best Girl Takimi and get the tutorial of the gun shop. We will upgrade the guns for the entire party here. In my gun damage only run, I realized that those starting guns are actually pretty powerful for the first palace, and they will help a lot when it comes to conserving SP. Before going back into the palace, we also rank up Ryuji to rank 2. Something to keep in mind here is that due to the limited amount of personas we can get in this run, Confidence will take longer to rank up, considering we won't have matching arcanas a lot of the time. Luckily, time management is rather lenient in Royal, so that shouldn't be such a huge issue. The next day we're back into the palace and get the tutorial fusion like mentioned before. This is the only fusion we're going to do because, well, basically we have to do it. This was also the reason why we got Ryuji to rank 2 before coming back in. We use the Arcana bonus from the Chariot rank on Magic and Endurance, and also inherit Aya. Agathion will learn Seal natively, and yeah, that's pretty much all for now. While we have some footage of the palace running in the background, let's quickly check which personas are available in Castle number 1 and which one we are going to pick. Looking at the list of possible shadows, we have quite a few to choose from, and while you may think choosing the correct one is rather hard, in this case it is actually very easy for a specific reason. I'm trying to plan as much of this in advance as possible, and looking ahead, there is a mini-boss fight against Nue coming up early in the second palace, which we have to complete with only Joker and Ryuji. Nue is weak to fire, so naturally we want somebody with access to Agi, which already cuts our options down to Jack-o'-lantern, Kate Sith, and Succubus. When you look at the elemental affinities, it becomes clear very quickly that Succubus is the best way to go here. Not only does she have the best magic stats out of the three, she also nullifies curse damage, and newest most dangerous attack is Maya, which is an AoE curse attack that Succubus would just completely nullify. Technically, we could also grab Ahuapo in Madarame's palace, but this one is neutral to curse and would also lock us out of several other useful personas we could get there, so I feel like Succubus is definitely the right play here. Before we even get there though, we have to make it through the mini-boss in this dungeon first, and this one is already a pretty dangerous one that could potentially wipe a party member. Because of this, I wanted to play it as safe as possible and decided to grind a little before approaching it. Luckily, in the room right before the mini-boss, there are 2 red shadows spawning, which give quite some experience. Barif, while pretty dangerous and easily able to one-shot a character, can be put to sleep using Answer Mina spell. We grind here until we hit level 10 with the party. Even though we could theoretically go all the way to level 11, I stopped at 10 since I wasn't sure how much more experience the remaining mandatory fights in this palace give. Remember, we're not allowed to go past level 11 here, since we're not allowed to be at a higher level than the boss of the palace is. And with that, we are off into the first real mini-boss fight of the game against Archangel. Archangel only has 2 attacks, Charge and Cleave. In Vanilla P5 he also had an AoE physical attack, but luckily for this type of run, they removed that in Royal. Archangel charges on turn 1, and then hits a party member on turn 2. From previous playthroughs, I remember that he loves to snipe on turn 1. Because of this, we put a Rakukaja on her to boost her defense, and that worked just as expected. Had we gotten unlucky here and Archangel would have targeted Mona, he probably would have been one-shot. Looking at it now, the safer play would have probably been to guard with both Morgana and An in order to take the hit, but this worked out, so I'm not going to complain. Due to the previous grinding, we're quite a bit higher here than we're supposed to be, so the turn afterwards is already enough to put the boss down before he even gets a chance to charge up for another attack. All party members still alive, no major setbacks, I'd say this is a good start so far. At this point we also get access to the later parts of the palace, where we can finally get our one and only persona for this dungeon, Succubus. Up next, we got the 2 mandatory fights against the Eligors in order to acquire the eyes needed to advance. Since both Succubus and An know Dormina, we once again use the sleep status to our advantage to not only get technical hits and all-out attacks easier, but also in order to mitigate the incoming damage by having them not attack on the turn due to the sleep status. I think this is also my first run where I use the intel function quite often to check whose turn is coming up next. If Eligor is up next, I usually defend and not wake it up to avoid getting attacked before going back to work on the enemy's HP. And that's pretty much it for the palace. The only thing left is the gatekeeper of the last will seed, Slime, which, just like Eligor, is not really a big roadblock. Put to sleep, hit technicals, crits, and all-out attacks, and the fight is already over soon after. Since the party is still level 10 at this point, we grind some more random enemies until we reach level 11 with everybody. Not only is this our level cap for the palace, it is also the level where An learns Tarunda and Morgana learns Media, 2 spells that are going to be incredibly useful against the upcoming boss. And that is all for palace number 1. We return to the real world and prepare for the first big boss fight. We make a short stop at the clinic to buy a few AoE healing items from Takimi. I wasn't sure if those are going to be needed or not, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. We sent the calling card and are back into the palace the following day. Now, Kamoshida has a total of 3000 HP, and in the beginning of the fight either attacks party members with Volleyball Assault or raises his attack with Lustful Slurp. The damage on the party is rather low as long as you keep the attack debuff up, and only a couple of turns later we already enter the next phase of the fight where he regenerates his HP with the trophy. The wiki says the trophy has 900 HP in Royal, but from what I can tell it's closer to the 500 it supposedly has in Vanilla P5, and with the party dealing pretty decent amounts of damage to it, it's already destroyed again after 2 turns. The following turn, Kamoshida sets up his gold medal spikes, so we guard with everybody and barely take any damage from the super attack either. Afterwards, Shio is summoned and Kamoshida will continue using gold medal spike until she's gone. You can either beat Shiho or deal around 300 damage to Kamoshida in order to get rid of her. We choose the latter, and within a single turn, Shio is already gone again. With that, we already enter the last phase of the fight where we'll send a party member to try and grab the crown. We go for Ryuji here since I wanted to keep Morgana for heals and An for debuffs. Kamoshida at this point only uses Golden Knife anymore, which doesn't really do a lot of damage, and a few turns later, Ryuji is able to snatch the crown. With Kamoshida's defense being basically non-existent now, we deal huge amounts of damage to the boss, and just a few attacks later, the battle is already over. This fight really was not a big issue at all, but I was kind of expecting this going in already. Later bosses might be a much bigger problem, but for now, I'm glad we're off to a good start. Anyways, we're back in the real world now and have some spare time to use. We continue ranking up Ryuji since with Agathion, he's one of the few confidants we have a matching arcana for. We also start Sojiro's, but since his benefits are not that useful in this challenge, we probably won't level him past rank 2 for now. I expect we will need quite some more days to max out certain confidants due to not having matching arcana, so I'd rather spend the evenings working on social stats like reading books or going to the bathhouse. Once Kamoshida confesses his crimes, the party goes out to celebrate our victory, and we get to name our group going forward. The name I went with this time was the Snus. Get it? Because it's a Nuzlocke. Alright, I'll see myself out. Anyways, the party visits Mementos for the first time, and we could get another persona in here, but due to me not really paying too much attention to the game here, I actually completely forgot about that. We will come back later to grab a persona here, but for now, it's not really needed anyways. Back in the real world, we also start the confidant with Yoshida here. We won't max him, but getting him up to rank 5 makes it easier to get rare items during negotiation. A lot of enemies give out skill cards, which will increase the variety of things we can do, since we're very limited when it comes to which personas we can get. We also meet Maruki and get the first 2 ranks of his confidant. Technically, he's the only one we need to max in order to get the Royal exclusive content, so you want to try to get him up early too. And with that, we are already on the way to Palace number 2. We go through the first section of the palace, but we're not going to grab a new persona here yet. If you look at the possible options to recruit, one persona clearly sticks out, and that is Shikiuchi. Since we're now in Palace number 2, the max level cap is raised to level 18, and Shikiuchi just so happens to be level 18 in Royal as well, so that works out perfectly. Shikiuchi nulls all physical damage, as well as Bless and Curse, and also has good stats. It also gets access to Psy Magic, something we won't have on any party member until we get Haru later on, so pretty much the perfect choice to go with here. Once we get the party to level 15, we leave the palace and send on to Yusuke's casting couch in order to get rid of the barrier. The party consisting only of Choka and Ryuji now has to get through Nue, and this was a fight I was very afraid of. If you remember earlier, we specifically got Succubus in Kamoshida's castle in order to counter Nue as best as somewhat possible. I wanted to see if I can maybe put Nue to sleep, but like expected, that is not going to work. Ryuji buffs Choka's attack with Tarokaja, and the falling Skullcracker luckily hits Ryuji. While it does confuse him, unfortunately it's still better than the mini-boss hitting Choker. After using Agi, we heal Ryuji, and Ryuji uses a muscle drink during confusion. While that does heal him to full, it also decreases his defense, so I'm not quite sure what to make of this. Because this game at its core is still an SMT game, of course the following Agi misses, and the next Skullcracker hits like a truck. Luckily, a double Agi the following turn already does pretty big damage, and Ryuji can finish off the fight with the following hit. A little messy, but still rather safe, and we still have access to all party members. Speaking of which, An and Yusuke end up in the palace, Yusuke awakens to his persona, and party member number 5 joins the group. In the following battle, Yusuke knocks down all Kappa Tengus with Bufo, and then luckily crits Ippon Datara, so the following all-out attack is already enough to get rid of all the Kappa Tengus. An uses Tarunda to decrease the incoming damage since Ippon Datara hits like a truck, even with decreased attack. Other than that, the fight is not that dangerous though, and we finish the boss off the following turn already. Back in the real world, we wait a little bit until we return to the palace, mostly to get Ryuji to rank 7. Rank 7 unlocks his insta-kill ability, and I wasn't quite sure how to handle that since you automatically get personas if you run over enemies. Eventually, I decided to allow it for the run under the condition that all personas we acquire that way have to be released immediately without being ever used. Since the insta-kill only works on enemies way below the party's level, I figured it wouldn't be a big deal. Even more so considering we have a maximum level cap anyways and therefore won't be able to exploit it for the most part. After that, we return to the palace and start the infiltration. For now, we will stick with the same parties since they offer more utility than Yusuke. We need Morgana for heals and An for magic and debuffs. You can probably make an argument for replacing Ryuji with Yusuke, but considering Ryuji gets access to Matsurukaja later, he's probably more versatile than Yusuke overall. The first mini-boss coming up is a Kurama Tengu accompanied by 2 Kappa Tengus. We use Joker's ailment gun to apply shock to the mini-boss, and Ryuji hits a technical knockdown at it with headbutt. The baton pass to An is enough to knock out the Kappa Tengus with the falling Maragi, and the boss itself is also down already the next turn. The second mini-boss, if you can even call it that, is a fight against 3 Makami, and this one is a joke. Ryuji knocks them down with Seo, and a single all-out attack is enough to end the fight. With that, we're pretty much done with the palace, but there is one more fight left before approaching the boss, which would be against the last Willseed gatekeeper Arahabaki. I thought about giving this one a shot, but then I remembered the trouble I had with it during my last challenge run, where Arahabaki often wiped half of my party before I could even set up anything. Considering the party is also a lower level this time around, I really didn't feel comfortable and eventually decided to skip it. This fight is optional, and I really didn't feel like gambling half of my party or even the entire run on a fight that wasn't mandatory to begin with. While the accessory would be pretty useful in the upcoming fight against Madarame, it's not worth the risk, and we can always grab the last Willseed in mementos later. The only thing left to do here is to get up to level 18 and get our new persona. Since Shikiuchi is a red shadow, you need to get it into low HP before being able to recruit it. Shikiuchi hits hard, but with a Tarunda up, the damage is manageable for the most part. Its only weakness is nuke damage, but luckily we got an accessory that lets Choka use Fry, so once we get it low enough, we hit the weakness and recruit it. And that's pretty much all for Palace number 2. We return to the real world and send the calling card shortly afterwards. The boss fight against Madarame comes in 2 phases. In phase 1 you have to destroy all parts of the painting, and I was actually rather scared about the damage of the mouth part here. The left eye likes to buff it with Tarokaja, and considering we have a level cap in place, I wasn't sure how much damage that would do. We also focus on the nose part first, since it is the only one with access to AoE magic. Luckily An dodges the first bite, and we can take out the nose before it can get an attack off. The second bite does hit An, but luckily it does way less damage than I thought it would, so nothing to worry about here. We take care of the remaining parts and transition into phase 2 of the battle, where Madarame summons a bunch of fakes. Unlike in my last challenge run, this time we can take full advantage of their elemental weaknesses, so we use the baton pass to max out our damage, and then throw a double shot from Shikiuchi onto Madarame himself. Luckily, even weakness hits from the fakes don't really do a lot of damage, so we just continue on like before, and yeah, that is pretty much it already. Towards the end of the fight we have 4 fire fakes, and while we don't have any access to ice magic with our setup, we can use the free sprays from our inventory to get weakness hits and baton pass that way. 2 more attacks from Joker are already enough, and Big Boss number 2 is down and out. Admittedly, this was much easier than I first expected. Generally, this entire challenge has been going very smooth so far, with the exception of that minor hiccup right at the start. Let's just hope it continues on like that. Anyways, we return to the real world again and have quite some downtime now. We continue leveling up our confidence and also unlock Best Girl Kawakami as well as Best Girl Kasumi. We also go back into Mementos again to finish off the requests we have gotten in the meantime, as well as grab 2 new personas. The first section of Mementos doesn't really have anything useful at this point anymore. Pretty much all the options are pretty underleveled and are probably not going to help out much. Because of this, I decided to go with Mandrake for the sole reason that it is a Death Arcana, which means we can level up Takemi faster. The second section doesn't really have that many useful options either. Even most Arcanas here aren't really what we are looking for. Eventually, I decided to go with Archangel here. He's the highest level, can learn a couple of bless spells, and is also a Justice Arcana, which means we can bring up Akachi faster later on. Back in the real world, we unlock Kichi-Uchi shortly afterwards. We grab the Darkness Belt for a Party Watsu Kukaja and go to the darts and billiard place for the first time. Baton Pass and technical level ups increase the damage quite a bit, so we will make sure to get those done rather early. We also get access to the Twin Warden hangout events at this point. I never really did those in any of my playthroughs up until now, since the majority of skill cards you get here usually aren't worth spending time on, but in a setup like this, they could become pretty useful, so might as well. We unlock Yusuke's Confidant, and shortly afterwards Best Girl Makoto blackmails the party into helping her look for the criminal terrorizing Shibuya. In Shinjuku, we meet Best Girl Chihaya as well as Oya, and at this point we are ready to head into Palace number 3. With the party now entering a new palace, the max level cap once again gets raised to the level of the new palace boss Kaneshiro, who is level 26. The scripted fights against the Onis are not a big issue. Even though they don't have a weakness, we can stun them with Joker's ailment gun and do big damage with technicals and baton passes. Makoto awakens to her persona and we easily take care of the fight afterwards. Suiki is weak to nuke, and the Onis once again can be stunned down with Joker's ailment gun. Since you can also hit technicals with nuke skills on a shocked enemy, the Onis quickly go down and Suiki follows shortly afterwards. We return to the palace the following day and also get the tutorial for showtime attacks. This sure brings back memories from the last challenge run of this game. Since we're off into a new palace, we also get to recruit another persona again, and looking at the possible options here, nothing really sticks out too much, to be honest. Shikiuchi has much better affinities than anything we can potentially get here. The Red Shadow Takemi Nakata would be the highest level, but it doesn't really offer anything game changing. In the end, we went with Orthoris, not because it's particularly useful, but because when you itemize it during a fusion alarm, we can grab a Miragion skill card, and an AoE tier 2 spell at this point is pretty useful to have. The first mini-boss, if you can even call it one, is against 5 Orobas, which is a breeze. Stun with Joker's gun, hit technicals and baton passes, and we're already done again. Up next, we have the encounter against Fuki, Suiki and Kinki. Kinki nulls guns, but we can still get a lucky stun on one of them. Suiki is the first one we're trying to take out here, since it knows Mabufula, which has a decent chance to freeze a party member. If somebody gets frozen and then hit with a technical from Kinki, the party member is probably wiped, so we want to avoid that at all costs. Once both ads are gone, only Kinki remains, and at this point the fight is pretty safe. Again we stun and take advantage using technicals, and the mini boss is down soon after. The only battle left at this point is the fight against the Will Seed Gatekeeper Cerberus. This one is rather annoying since it has Counter Strike, therefore it's not as easy getting a stun on as with most fights before. Luckily it's weak to ice, so we can use some of the free sprays to get a weakness hit and do damage with the following all-out attack. And yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. A few items and all-out attacks later, the boss is defeated and we retrieve the last Will Seed. This one is actually very important since it gives you access to Marakukaja. Being able to use an AoE defense buff at this point of the game is incredibly useful and is going to make a lot of the upcoming fights quite a bit safer. Before leaving the palace, we get the tutorial for Fusion Alarm, and this is going to come in very handy throughout the game. You can get some real useful skill cards here, including Triple Down once we sacrifice our Shikiuchi. This will still take some time, but it's definitely something to remember for later down the road. We send out the calling card soon after, and are ready to head into the next big boss fight. Unsurprisingly, the boss battle once again comes in two phases. In phase 1, we need to fight Kanashiro's Piggytron. We start off the battle using our new defense buff, and also debuff the boss's attack with Tarunda, and as you can see, the incoming damage is rather low. Because of this, I decided against guarding when he set up for his March of the Piggy special attack, and the damage, while quite a bit higher than before, still was nothing to worry about. Once Piggytron is down, we enter the second phase of the fight where Kanashiro summons 2 bodyguards to fight with him. Now the strat here is to put both bodyguards to sleep in order to directly damage the boss. Due to the party having a level cap of 26 though, An wasn't able to learn Lullaby yet, so we use a combination of Dormina and Sleep Vials to put the bodyguards to sleep before starting to work on Kanashiro himself. Considering Kanashiro likes to put the entire party to sleep himself, it's a good idea to try and shock him to prevent him from getting turns. Unfortunately, this doesn't quite work out like I first intended to, which made the fight a bit trollier, but not much more difficult. Once you get him down to a certain HP threshold, you will start using Make It Rain, which only does percentage damage and literally can't wipe you. At this point, the bodyguards also start running away and the fight is pretty much won. The following turn, we finish him off with a nice Showtime attack and complete Palace number 3 with all party members still intact. With quite some downtime again, we continue working on our confidence. We start the confident with Makoto and also hang out with the Twin Wardens some more. The skill cards here aren't that useful yet for the most part, but there will be quite some nice ones down the line. We also start the confident with Oya, and literally the only reason we do this is to be able to work at the bar during nighttime, which is needed to unlock a momentous request at a later point. After getting access to Kanda, we also start off the confident with Best Girl Hifumi. The ability to change party members mid-battle might be very useful in case something goes horribly wrong and we actually lose a character. With the help of Billiard, we also get our technical rank up to level 3. We can't max it out before we get max proficiency yet, but every rank increases our damage output, so you'll want to get that up high quickly. Once we get Akechi to rank 4, we also unlock the Jazz Club. Considering we have a lot of confidence to take care of, the Jazz Club isn't the highest priority at the moment, but we will come here regularly on Sundays for a variety of new party member skills. After Kanashiro confesses his crimes, we return back into Mementos as well. We haven't been here between Madarame and Kanashiro, so we basically have 2 new areas unlocked here, which means we can also recruit 2 new personas. Madarame's part doesn't really have any useful personas at this point anymore, considering they are quite underleveled already. Because of this, I actually looked at the Personas Arcana again and chose one to help me build confidence faster. In the end, we went with Sodama, which is a Hermit Arcana, so we are able to rank up Best Girl Futaba more quickly once we unlock her later on. Kanashiro's part offers a couple of more interesting personas, including some we weren't even able to get in Kanashiro's Palace yet. Since we also completed Palace number 3, our max level cap is now raised to level 34, which gives us quite some more options. In the end, I decided to go with Kurama Tengu here. Not only is Kurama Tengu the highest level persona in this area with level 31, it also has no weaknesses and access to wind magic, something the party is lacking since we ditched Morgana earlier. The only thing to watch out now is, due to the party already being level 31, we're only allowed to gain 3 more levels before fighting the palace boss in the next dungeon, since the level cap is still 34. Once we're done with everything, we return back to the real world, where we are already about to enter the next palace. I know I mention this every single time I do a challenge run of this game, but this also includes my favorite cutscene in the entire game. Just beautiful. Anyways, the first mini-boss encounter coming up here is against Garuda, and this one is rather easy. We get a lucky shock proc with Sionga, and the technical hits afterwards finish the battle off rather quickly. The second mini-boss fight against Maud is a little bit of a bigger issue. Ideally, we want to avoid having a party member being attacked while in the mouse state, since that is very likely to one-shot them. Again, we try to work with status elements, in this case sleep, to get a couple of technical hits in there. Sleep also prevents the enemy from attacking, so that adds another extra layer of safety to the fight. We also managed to get a stun on it, and that pretty much seals the deal, and the fight is soon over afterwards. Pretty much the same strategy is applied against the second mod fight, though this one is even easier since it comes with 2 adds, so we can make use of the weakness to get a couple of baton passes and then deal big damage to the boss. And yeah, that's mostly it. We finish the battle off with another showtime attack and continue on. The last mini-boss waiting in this dungeon, as always, is the Willseed Gatekeeper Alilad. Alilad is weak to fire, so once again we make use of unstrong fire magic, combined with a few firecrackers to get a lot of weakness hits in. Alilad has access to Bufodyne, so you want to make sure to debuff its attack and raise your own defense, since a hit on An could mean the end for her. Other than that, again, it's not a big deal. Alilad is very tanky, but after a couple of weakness hits and all out attacks, the fight is over and the last Willseed is retrieved. The only thing left to do now is acquire a new persona. Again, we have all kinds of options here. Thoth would be an interesting choice, but unfortunately is level 36, which is higher than the cap we currently have. Because of that, we went with Anubis. Anubis has no weaknesses and access to both bless and curse damage. Since it does not have a weakness though, we have to knock it down using technical hits, and you want to make sure Anubis does not get a chance to attack at all. In my very first playthrough of P5 Vanilla, Anubis actually wiped the entire party since it can attack twice per turn and has access to strong AoE magic, so I was really afraid something could go terribly wrong here. Luckily we got the recruitment on the first try, so no big harm done. And that is pretty much it. We sent the calling card the following day and are off to the, in my opinion, easiest boss fight in the entire game. Wakaba can only be attacked with range attacks, but does take 5 times damage from physical and gun attacks. Phase 1 is pretty much scripted in the sense that you only have to survive to trigger Phase 2, where Futaba awakens to her persona. Once that happens, you can send a party member to the ballista in order to shoot her down. If you answer Wakaba's dialogue correctly, you can also repel all of her damage right back to her, and yeah, I think that is already pretty much everything there is to mention about this battle. Shoot her down, attack her, and win the fight. Like I said, this is definitely the easiest boss battle in the entire game. Since we have quite a bit of downtime now again, we can use that opportunity to get our confidence up even more. We work on our party members and also finally got enough guts to start the confident with a Y, the gun shop owner. We take Makoto to a game of darts in order to max out her baton pass rank and also go to the chess club on her on Sunday to learn Marakunda. We have very limited means of decreasing the enemy's defense at this point, so this definitely comes in handy. Ryuji is the first party member we max out here, since we actually had a matching Arcana thanks to Agathion, therefore we were able to rank him up much faster compared to the other ones. Once Futaba recovers, we start her confident as well. We will also take her to the chess club regularly on Sundays, since she gets access to debuff skills. Those only happen randomly, but it could make things a little easier, so we'll definitely take that. We also returned back to Mementos, where we unlocked a new path of Exariuth. I'm pretty sure I botched that name hard, but whatever. After attempting the request with the cheating gamer, in order to unlock Shinya's confident, we take a look at the list of personas we can acquire here. The options are pretty much the same we had in Futaba's palace, but considering the level cap is now raised all the way to 43, we can also recruit Thoth now. This one isn't really that useful, but it is one of the first personas with access to Megiddo. The even more important part though is, itemizing Thoth during a fusion alarm grants you a Frydine skill card, one of the first tier 3 spells we could get our hands on. Back in the real world, it's now time for the Hawaii trip. Considering Makoto is the only confident we leveled up far enough without rejecting her yet, we spent our evening with her, and it was at this point that I decided to waifu Makoto in this run. I wasn't really sure who I wanted to choose here, and Makoto, similarly to Haru in my last run, isn't really one of my favorites, but her high versatility makes her really useful in this challenge, so I guess it's only fair we reward her for that. Now, we're going to completely ignore the plot with Morgana and Ryuji fighting and stuff because it's easily my least favorite part of the game, so let's just skip forward to the first part of the next palace. Best girl Haru awakens to her persona, and we now have to fight her fiancé. The fiancé is weak to Psy attacks, while the adds are weak to fire. Thanks to this, we can do a lot of damage with baton passes and pretty much end the battle on the first turn already. The robot chiefs are also not really a problem. The adds are always weak to fire, so An is already doing a lot of damage, and the following baton passes are often enough to finish off the battle already. The second mini-boss fight against the groups of robots is actually quite annoying since they like to spam Mataronda and also Mazukunda, making it hard to hit them, and if we do hit, the damage is rather low for the most part. Luckily the robots themselves barely do any damage, so while this is quite a hassle, it never really got any dangerous, and eventually we finish them off and continue on. The last mini-boss fight is against the Will Seed Gatekeeper Melchizedek, and this one is quite annoying too. It's only weak to wind and also hits pretty hard. In fact, if it wasn't for An having endured due to her confident rank, she would have been one-shot by God's hands, so yeah, definitely want to keep your attention level up here. Eventually, we're able to put it to sleep, and while it does recover quite some HP, it makes it a lot easier to deal big damage with a technical hit. Once again, we also make use of elemental items to get easy knockdowns, and with a nice showtime, we end the fight yet again. And that is pretty much all for this palace too. If you paid close attention though, you might have noticed that we still haven't gotten a persona in this palace yet, and those familiar with the game might know why. Looking at the persona list in this palace, it is pretty easy to see that there is one option that clearly sticks out, and unsurprisingly, it is Giri Mekala. Giri Mekala repels both physical and guns, nulls curse, resists fire, and only has a blast weakness. Up until now, we still use Shikiuchi quite a lot due to its affinities, and Giri Mekala is basically Shikiuchi on steroids, but with a weakness. It is by far the best option in here, so we definitely want to grab it as soon as we get to level 43. Since Shikiuchi served its purpose at this point, we used the fusion alarm to itemize it into a triple down card. There are only very few gun skills in this game, so having one of them on a skill card is pretty useful in terms of utility. Once that is done, we leave the palace and prepare for the upcoming boss fight, and to be honest, this was probably the boss fight I was most afraid of. Obviously, this boss fight wants you to make use of weakness hits and baton passes, but I wasn't entirely sure whether the level cap would give me any big trouble or not. Wave 1 was easily taken care of with a double Moragion from An. Wave 2 has an ice weakness, something we can't cover, so we use freeze sprays to pass around the baton until Ryuji hits a full power Swift Strike, which was enough to get rid of the majority of them. The remaining ones afterwards, we just finish up with regular attacks. Wave 3 is where things start to get a little trickier. Right after spawning, Okumura uses Work Order, which basically means if we don't wipe them quickly, they will respawn. Luckily, they are weak to both electricity and nukes, so once again, we pass the baton around and Makoto quickly takes care of them. Wave 4 is weak to wind and blast, so just like before, we pass around the baton until we can unleash a fully powered Makuga from Joker. Wave 5 is where the big boys come to play, and the hunger inflicted by Okumura makes this even more trolley now. We throw out a Marakunda to get some more damage, but the double Maiga doesn't really do a whole lot of damage. In hindsight, it probably would have been better to just do something else with Joker, and then again pass the baton around for some nice extra damage. On the second turn, we did exactly that, but unfortunately 2 managed to survive and ran away, therefore respawning the entire wave and basically resetting our progress. This is probably the worst thing about this boss fight. If you don't defeat the waves fast enough, they will respawn and you're back at square one. I also got pretty lucky here because I didn't notice that Ryuji was gonna be targeted, and as you can see, his HP are going down quickly. Luckily he has endured this point, but if any of the 4 targets would have gotten a second hit in due to an unlucky crit, Ryuji would have been down and out. Anyways, We are able to clear the wave the following turn, and now we have to fight the biggest boy. The Big Bang special attack does huge amounts of damage, so you want to make sure your buffs and debuffs are up. I actually game overed here on my last challenge run, so I was trying to be as safe as somewhat possible this time around. Okumura putting hunger on and also decashing the party certainly didn't make things any easier either. Luckily there is a somewhat simple cheese to this fight. You can put the freeze status on our big boy by using a freeze spray, so we can pretty much guarantee that the enemy is never going to attack. And we rinse and repeat that process until he's down, and at this point the fight is pretty much won. Shadow Horror is not a big issue at all. We simply guard her explosion, and a single hit to Okumura afterwards is already enough to end the battle and complete the next palace. Since we have some downtime now again, we go back and focus on our confidence. We start off the confident with Shinya and also take Makoto to the chess club in order to get concentrate on her. We max out Mishima and accidentally discover an unknown palace with Kasumi. Considering there is only one fight to do here, which is also pretty easy, there isn't much worth mentioning here. We max out on and also engage into a relationship with Makoto at this point, so basically we're in the interrogation room telling Sai how we bang her little sister. Smooth Joker. Very smooth. Anyways, we also unlock Haru and the vegetable garden now, and some of those are really useful, especially the Moonlight Carrot, which fully heals a party member's SP. Until now, we didn't have that many SP problems, but endgame spells cost quite a lot, so it's pretty good to have a decent stock of those. Akechi gets invited to the school festival and basically blackmails the party into joining him in order to change Sai's heart. Before we do that though, we do another Memento strip to complete all requests and also get a new persona from the Path of Adya's hack, I guess. God, what even are those names? Anyways, the level cap at this point is raised all the way up to level 53. The personas available here are pretty much the same as in Okumura's palace. There isn't anything that really sticks out, considering we just had a big upgrade with Giri Mikala, so in the end, we went with everyone's favorite toilet demon Belphegor. Similar to Thoth last time, Belphegor can be itemized into a Bufodine skill card during Fusion Alarm, and considering that we don't have any ice coverage in our A-team, this comes in very handy. Once everything is done, we return back from Mementos only to dive right into the next palace the following day. The first mini-boss waiting here is Nebiros. Nebiros can be quite annoying since it likes to brainwash the party. Other than that, it's not really a big deal though, expose the weakness, baton pass, and do damage until dead. Mini-boss number 2 Norn is a little more special. Norn likes to fully heal itself with the Arahan, so ideally you want to beat it within a single turn. Unfortunately, we didn't do quite enough damage, but instead of healing itself, it actually attacked with Garden one more time. I don't know why, but it was enough to easily dispose of it the following turn. Speaking of Norn, it is also going to be the persona we're going to recruit in this palace. At first I was debating whether to get Norn or Skadi, but in the end we went with Norn. Skadi has good access to ice matching, but we just got a Belphegor which we can itemize into a Bufodine card, so I felt like Norn would give me better benefits here. Next up is the Willseed Gatekeeper Bale. Magarodine can hit pretty hard, but luckily Ryuji's Evade Wind does quite some good work. We get the Lucky Shock proc, and this pretty much already seals the deal. Hit technicals, baton pass, and beat the boss. Rashanaga is next in line, and again it doesn't pose a big threat at all. Unfortunately we can shock it, but the burn still lets the party hit technicals on nuke attacks, and the burn itself also does some decent damage. It does use concentrate, but too little too late, and we beat it on the following turn. The last fight here is the Solar Choke Gauntlet, and this one is a joke. The two Ganeshas only use physical attacks, so they literally can't hurt us as long as we got Giri Mikala equipped. The Rangdas are down before they even get a turn, and Thor, just like Ganesha, only uses physical attacks, so this is pretty much free. And that is all for this palace. Since we have to wait until the last day to send the calling card, we have some downtime to kill now. We start Haru's Confident and also get Akechi up to the highest possible rank. The fight against Akechi is not a problem since he always rotates between using Megaton Raid that we can reflect, Aiga that we can block, Kuga and Megidola, which does do quite some damage, but can easily be healed up. We also get the last rank on Maruki to make sure we actually unlock the Royal exclusive content later on. At this point, we pretty much also max out Futaba, as well as most secondary confidants like Iwai and Hifumi. Since we have a lot of free time now during evenings, I also decided to get Sojiro a couple of ranks up, mostly for Kawakami to brew some master coffee in case we need more SP heals. Once D-Day has arrived, we return into the palace to head into the fight against Shadow Sai. Phase 1 is pretty much scripted. Lose the first draw, notice her cheating, win the second one, and transition into phase 2. Here it becomes a bit more interesting. Sai will spin the roulette where the element chosen will be repelled, and the counter element she will be neutral against while resisting everything else. This was also one of the reasons we went with Norn earlier, since it has a wide elemental coverage. I am not 100% sure, but I feel like the element chosen will always be one of the party members' weak elements. In this scenario we got Wind, and even though we already have access to a White Wind on Ryoji, we don't seem to get very lucky here. After a while, she will roll Almighty on the roulette, which makes her neutral to everything, but also gives her access to much stronger attacks than before. An has her Endure triggered after a Megidola, and when Sai uses Berserker Dance, Futaba actually has to interfere and block the attacks, so yeah, I am pretty sure An would have been wiped here. Thanks Futaba. And if that wasn't enough already, she follows it up with an Ultra Charge, which gives the party enough DPS to end the fight and complete yet another palace. Afterwards, we have to go through a crap ton of cutscenes, and soon after already end up in Shido's palace. The level cap now also gets increased once again to level 63, and considering we have quite a few mini bosses coming up in this one, I'd say let's get started right away. The first one is Yamato no Orochi, which is only weak to Psy attacks. Luckily you can also shock it, which does make things quite a bit easier, and only a couple of attacks later, mini boss number 1 is already down and out. Mini boss number 2 coming up is for Nias. This one is weak to electricity, which is pretty much perfect since once again we also want to work with the shock status anyways. Unfortunately though, Fornius seems to have fast heal or something, because it feels like it recovers from ailments pretty much immediately. Marin Karin is pretty annoying, but in general nothing we really have to fear all too much, and soon after, the next letter of recommendation is received. Next one in line is Hanuman, who is being accompanied by 2 Garudas. Raging the Garudas does make them quite a bit more dangerous, but they also take more damage that way. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as always. Try to get shotgun, hit technicals, baton passes, and weaknesses. A charged Bufudyne followed by Megaton Raid takes care of the mini-boss, and 3 out of the 5 are down. Before approaching mini-boss number 4, we have to take care of the Willseed Gatekeeper first, which is a Kali being accompanied by 2 Dakinis. This fight is pretty much the same as the Kalis you encounter throughout the dungeon, so again there isn't really anything special worth mentioning. Mini-boss number 4 is Oberon, accompanied by 2 Titanias. Oberon likes to cast instant death attacks. Luckily, everybody has access to Endure at this point, and we also got quite a few homunculus to make sure nobody goes down. Other than that, the fight is similar to before. Knock them down with their weaknesses, and try to hit big damage numbers with baton passes and technical hits. The last of the 5 is Ongyoki, and this one is a little more tricky as it doesn't have any weaknesses, and also seems to be immune to status ailments. At least I wasn't able to get anything to stick. His attacks for the most part are manageable with buffs and debuffs up, but considering we can't hit any big numbers, the battle does take quite a while. And of course there is also the encounter with Akechi coming up. Phase 1 with his summoned allies is relatively easy. Due to them being berserked, they take a lot of damage, and with buffs and debuffs up, the incoming damage is not too bad either. Phase 2 against Akechi himself is relatively easy too. When I saw Kuagan though, I was a little scared at first, seeing as Girimekala on Choka is weak to Bless, but even the weakness hit didn't do a whole lot of damage. Akechi also loves to hit Choco with Megaton Raid, which gets reflected right back at him thanks to Girimekala. Phase 3 is not that much different. Luckily at this point Akechi loses access to Bless magic, so Choka doesn't have to fear a weakness hit anymore. He likes to put on Tetrakarn and Makarakarn occasionally, which we can dispel by either doing a regular attack or just throwing an item with the element the party member nulls. The incoming damage with buffs and debuffs up is rather low and nothing to worry about really, and that's pretty much it. Charge, concentrate, and attack until Akechi is down and out for good. And that is it for this palace. Well, maybe not everything yet. A few of you might have noticed that we haven't recruited a new persona in here yet, and the reason for that is very simple. Looking at all possible options here, the best one to get is probably Kali, the Red Shadow who is level 63. Kali has no weakness, repels guns and Psy, nulls fire, and resists curse. With the null physical skill card, we can put another immunity on it, so we have great elemental affinities here. And to add to this, it also has access to Charge, Brave Blade, and Vorpal Blade, so it's an incredible physical attacker. Okay, now we finished up the palace for good. We return back into the real world, only to send the calling card the following day, and prepare for the big showdown against Shido. The first Shido fight has 3 phases. In the first one, he repels all physical damage, so magic is the way to go here. Shido likes to use the Kasha and the Kunda, so your buffs and debuffs usually are not up for very long. Luckily our magic attacks do quite some damage and phase 1 is over quickly. In phase 2, he resists all elements but takes neutral damage from physical attacks, so Choka and Ryuji are the ones taking over the DPS part here. In the last phase of the fight, he's now neutral to pretty much everything, so once again, we throw all our big stuff at him. His cannon fire does quite a bit of damage and almost triggers Makoto's Endure, but other than that, it's not too dangerous and the fight is over quickly. Shido always opens up the second fight with Heat Riser. Luckily we have the Kasha items to nullify those, and debilitate items to decrease all his stats. Again, he's neutral to everything during this part, so we can throw everything we have at him. Tyrant's Fist is pretty much the only attack that does big damage, actually even triggering Ann's Endure, so I was kind of getting a little afraid at this point. Bloodbath barely does any damage, but the extra fear element is rather annoying. Other than that, it's the same as in the previous fight, and we continue on until he's done and transforms yet again. In this form, he gains access to pretty much all high level magic spells there are, as well as some very powerful physical moves. It becomes especially dangerous when he's using Heat Riser and charging up before hitting several party members with pretty strong attacks. Luckily, Futaba is still here to interfere and prevent any deaths from happening. Once he's down to his last quarter, he throws out everybody and we now have to fight him solo Joker. As mentioned before, he can use all kinds of elemental damage here, but luckily we have several personas with no weaknesses, or even some with repels and drains. Because of this, the last phase of this fight is pretty much a joke and we're able to finish off the fight and complete the seemingly last palace. We still have some time until the plot advances further, though at this point we have pretty much finished up all confidants that are important. Because of that, more often than not, we start going to the gym and also go to the jazz club with party members. We also go back to Mementos one more time since we haven't recruited any persona on the last path yet. This path unlocks after beating Sai already, but only has personas from her palace. However, if you wait until you beat Shido's palace, personas from his one also start spawning in this area, which is perfect for us, since we can only recruit a single new persona. The list is pretty much the same as it was in Shido's palace. In this case, we went with King Frost here. I was already thinking about going for it in Shido's palace, but felt Kali would be more important early. King Frost has no weaknesses, gets Ice Amp and also concentrates, so it's a pretty nice magic persona compared to Kali who has a physical focus. Back in the real world, we take Makoto to the jazz club on December 11th for her to learn Debilitate. In the third trimester, she will learn the AoE version of that as her ultra skill, but for now, this is really useful, especially looking ahead at the next part. Also enjoy this footage of Joker training at home while Kawakami is making infiltration tools in the background and watching our strong boy become swole. On Christmas Eve, the party decides to erase mementos, so let's get going, shall we? Since we enter a new area, the level cap once again gets raised, this time to level 75. To be honest, none of the forced fights or mini-boss encounters or whatever you want to call it proved to be any issue, so we'll skip right ahead to the next important part. In case you wondered, we're not going to grab a new Persona in the Mementos devs, since I consider the devs and the Glyphoth world as one dungeon, and the Persona spawning there are a lot more useful compared to Mementos. With that being said, the next interesting part is once we get past the first available Holy Grail fight. We have to get through a couple of Archangels, with the first one being Uriel, who also likes to summon additional angels to the battlefield. And as pretty much always, nothing big happening here. We charge up, get a lucky crit with Joker, and are able to beat the first Archangel within the first turn of dealing damage. The next one coming up is Raphael, who likes to start off by using Heat Riser and Charge. Luckily, we can easily negate the buffs and start buffing our own party. A charged Sword Dance still hits pretty hard, but is nothing to actually worry about in terms of losing a character. Once we got our buffs up, it's time to attack. I got a bit lucky in the end by critting and finishing off the enemy with the Falling All Out attack, but even without that, it probably wouldn't have been any more difficult. At this point, Choka also levels up to level 73. We briefly talked about not getting a Persona into Mementos devs, but rather here, and looking at the list of possible Personas, they all have some kind of usefulness. In the end, we went with Mara for two different reasons. Reason number one is that it has incredible affinity coverage, being immune to 4 different elements. 5 if you count the non-physical card as well. And the reason number 2 being the skill set. Mara has one-shot kill and learns charge on the physical side. On the magical side, it learns Psycho Force, which is probably the one element we're lacking the most, as well as Psy-Amp for more extra damage. Literally big dig energy right there. Anyways, we continue on with the Archangels with Gabriel up next. Again, we debuff the enemy, set up everything on the party, and then go to work. The boss did get a lucky freeze on Joker, but since it doesn't use any physical attacks to follow up, I didn't even bother healing it. A couple of attacks later, the fight is over and there is only one more to go. The last Archangel in the way is Michael. Similar to Uriel, he likes to summon angels to the field, which we can use to our advantage. Once we set up our buffs, we use the angels' weaknesses to get a baton pass, crit with Joker and one-shot kill, and let An throw out a concentrated blazing hell for some real nice damage. Sword Stance from Michael does some nice numbers too, but too little too late, and we finish off the fight shortly afterwards. And that's all before heading into the big boss fight against the Holy Grail / Yaldabaoth. The fight against the Holy Grail is basically like everything else at this point. Debuff the enemy, set up the party buffs, and go to work. Its special attack Eternal Light hits surprisingly hard, even with an attack debuff and a defense buff up, but luckily nobody went down to it. Afterwards, it's just a couple of charged attacks and the fight is already over again. With that out of the way, we head into the actual boss fight of this segment against Yaldabaoth. The strategy is basically the same as before. Debuff the enemy with Debilitate, and buff as well as charge and concentrate the party. Arrow of Light barely does any damage, and Futaba's Supercharge right after is the perfect setup to deal some big damage early. The extra adds that get summoned are a little annoying in terms of status elements, but for the most part they aren't that dangerous. When using AoE attacks, we make sure to always nullify the element we're using in order to nullify any incoming repel damage. And that is pretty much the entire strategy for this one. This fight really isn't all too special if you know what to expect. Buff, debuff, heal if necessary, and attack. Towards the end, Yaldabaoth revives all of his adds and goes for his super attack, but at this point the entire party is ready to go, and with some more attacks, we end the fight. We take a page out of the previous gun-only challenge, play some head games with Yaldabaoth, and save the world. Akechi takes the bullet for Joker, we spend Christmas Eve with our waifu, and the new year approaches. Now, I'm not going too deep into the story here, the majority of you already know what's happening anyways, so let's continue on with the actual game. The party, now only consisting of Joker, Akechi and Kasumi, are about to raid Maruki's palace. At this point, our level cap also gets raised again for the last time in this challenge. The wiki doesn't really have any information on Maruki's level, But up until now, the boss's level usually was the same as the red shadow from that dungeon. In this scenario, that would be Fafnir at level 86, so I think it's a fair bet to set our cap to that level as well. Kasumi/Sumire gets taken by Maruki, and we have to fight Hastur with only Joker and Akechi now, and to be honest, this one is rather annoying. The enemy can't really do a lot to Joker, but we have to try to keep Akechi alive since he's actually taking quite some damage and the enemy also likes to inflict fear on him too. Generally, Akechi's job is throwing healing items, while Joker tries to get damage in. A charged vacuum wave almost wipes Akechi, but in the end we manage to end the fight with both of them still alive and well. Once we spend some time with all party members, we return to Maruki's palace for part 2 of fun with Akechi. This time the fun quickly ends though. After taking care of Sumire, we have to fight the tactical version of Sandrilaw. Sandrilaw likes to use blast attacks, and as some of you may know, Akechi's low-key form actually has a blast weakness. And well, yeah, this happens. The first dual attack triggered Akechi's Endure, and instead of throwing a beat, I only healed with the Champions Cup, and there goes the first party member of the game. I wasn't planning on using Akechi much anyways, but this late into the game I was hoping to sweep through without losing any party members at all. Now, one could argue if this even counts, considering this is the scripted part of the fight before the rest of the party members show up, but a death is a death, and I guess we'll just count that. Anyways, the remaining members rejoin the party, and now we can actually start the real battle. We switch out Akechi and Morgana to have our A-team up and start going to work. As always, we make use of our buffs and debuffs and start dishing out the damage. Unfortunately, I wasn't getting very lucky in the early fight with crits or anything, so this was a much rougher start than I expected. The ads like to attack Joker with fire attacks, so by equipping Mara we just drain those and get a few free heals that way. At this point I also realized that the ads are actually weak to nuke damage, so this definitely makes things much easier. A double baton pass followed by Showtime attack does a good amount of damage, and afterwards it's just a few more attacks to end the battle. Sumire comes to her senses, and we continue investigating the palace a few days later. The first mini-boss encounter here is against Dionysus and Chimera, and to be honest, there isn't really anything noteworthy here. We manage to apply ailments, and then waifu Makoto just nukes them into oblivion. Now, before we dive even further into the palace, let's take a look at the possible personas we can recruit in here. Just like in the previous dungeon, we have several good options to recruit here, but for me personally, one sticks out, and you might have already guessed which one. We talked about the Red Shadow Fafnir earlier already, and this is also going to be our persona of choice for the last dungeon. It has great affinities as well as physical and nuke moves. It would also learn Atomic Flare, Nuke Imp and Debilitate, but unfortunately it is already level 86, which is our cap, so we're not allowed to level it any further. With that level cap in mind, we're not going to recruit Fafnir at this point yet, since the amount of mandatory battles still coming up would give the party at least one level, and considering we're not allowed to go past level 86, we will wait recruiting Fafnir until right before the final boss fight. At the end of the first part of this palace, we run into a mini-boss with Skahawk and Kukulin, and oh god, I hope I didn't butcher the names this hard again. I had a lot of people correcting me on the pronunciation in my last challenge, so I hope this was somewhat better than last time, and if not, please forgive me for being absolute trash at stuff like that. Anyways, the fight itself isn't that special. Once again, we put up buffs and debuffs and go to work. We exploit the electricity weakness, and the baton pass powered Showtime almost takes out one of the two with a single hit. Again, we hit technical damage after inflicting some ailments, and the fight is over soon afterwards. Since the cables block our way, we can't progress any further at this point, so we will leave the palace to go investigate in mementos. Before doing that though, we unlock the third awakening with all our party members. An's AoE Concentrate as well as Ryuichi's AoE Charge are really useful, but the real MVP in this setup is our waifu Makoto special skill, which is an AoE Debilitate. All of those spells cost a crap ton of SP, but considering we have been planning Moonlight Carrots for a while now, we should have enough SP regeneration available. We also do the last hangout event with what is now Lavenza, which grants us an Enduring Soul skill card. In theory this should not be needed, but a full HP heal in case of a wipe can be quite the safety anchor, considering I'm not sure how much damage Maruki is going to do later on. We also go back to the jazz club on Sundays for Ali Dance on An, Arms Master on Ryuji, and Spell Master on Makoto. Once we awakened all party members for the third time, we head into the new Mementos section, which also includes the very last persona we can recruit here. The pool is pretty much the same as in the Mementos dev, so there isn't really anything new to choose from here. Because of this, I went for Mod here. It has a pretty decent moveset, and especially Make It Alone might come in handy at some point. In case we don't need Mod, we could also itemize it, as it gives us a Repel Electricity skill card during a fusion alarm. Once we reach the top, Futaba deactivates the tentacle cable thingies, and we're free to explore Maruki's palace further. The first mini-boss waiting here is Cert. At this point I think you all know the drill. Buff debuff and go to work. Cert gets 2 actions each turn, but luckily his attacks only do very little damage. An is pretty much useless in this fight, so she mostly spams Matarunda to keep the enemy's attack down or heals up with Salvation. Makoto manages to get a freeze on with a freeze spray, and the following technical hit and baton passes do huge damage. Afterwards, Makoto finishes off with a regular attack by herself, and we continue on. The last Will Seed Gatekeeper in this one is actually a Fafnir. Luckily this fight is relatively easy, as you can just freeze the boss using items and then bypass the immunity with physical attacks. This will also be our strategy for recruiting it later, since Red Shadows need to be in low HP before you can start negotiating with them. The last mini boss here is Siegfried, and this one is rather annoying. He likes to land critical hits with his physical attacks and follows them up with Dizzy. Just like Cert before him, he also gets to act twice per turn, 3 times if he manages to land a crit, but other than that, it's the same as always. Buff debuff, hopefully manage to land an ailment, and then win the fight with a technical. And that's pretty much all for the last dungeon. Once we hit level 86, we recruit Fafnir, and this means we're ready for the final showdown of the game. On the very last day, we return to the palace and enter the final fight of this challenge. Unsurprisingly, the battle against Maruki consists of several phases. In phase 1, you face Maruki, Azathoth, and a couple of tentacles. Again we put out debuffs and buffs and start going to work. I wasn't sure how much damage the party would actually take from Maruki, considering I have been level 99 every time I got to this fight, but for the most part it was rather manageable. Unlike in the last Guns Only challenge, we can take full advantage of the mechanic in this fight now. The tentacles, while protecting Maruki and Azathoth, are all weak to several affinities, so we pass the baton around to wipe all tentacles, and then deal huge damage to the boss. Azathoth has about 6000 HP in phase 1, which are quickly depleted. Afterwards, we enter phase 2 where it has roughly 12,000 HP. The mechanics are pretty much the same in both phases, though Azathoth does get a couple of new attacks here. When he uses Tyrant Stance, I played it safe by guarding with the entire party. Looking at the incoming damage from the falling Tyrant Chaos, that probably wouldn't have been necessary though, but considering this is the last battle, I'm not gonna take any chances. Other than that, there isn't really much to talk about here. Continue buffing and debuffing, exploit weaknesses, pass the baton, and do damage until Azathoth is down. Once that is done, a single hit to Maruki is enough to end the fight, and continue on to phase 3. This time you fight Maruki by himself, and this is probably already the easier battle. Maruki only has 3000 HP, although he only takes reduced damage, getting him down is not an issue. Just make sure the party is fully healed, since he will sap 300 HP off of all party members once you get him down to a certain HP threshold. After Maruki's HP hits 0, this challenge is basically won. The last phase of this fight is scripted, and at this point you cannot lose anymore. We go through the last scripted turns, and end the last battle of this challenge by engaging in a manly fist fight to end this once and for all. And that is it, everybody. We beat Persona 5 Royal with a Nuzlocke rule setting. To be honest, when I started this challenge, I thought this might be quite tricky at certain points considering the combination of a limited amount of personas, no fusion, and a level cap could easily give you problems. To my surprise though, the entire run went by relatively smooth. There were a few hiccups here and there, but I was never really in a position where I could have lost the challenge. Still, I really enjoyed playing through the game like this. Planning personas ahead and trying to optimize your limited options was a lot of fun, and if anybody wants to give this one a shot too, I can only recommend it. Also special shoutouts to this video's patron Nervarel. If you want to be featured in the video as well, or just want to support the channel even more, feel free to check out the Patreon page that is linked below the video. That is it for me this time. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the videos as much as I did the challenge, and I hope to see all of you next time again. Until then, take care.